We are midway through a journey across Sicily. We'd started in the northwest corner at Palermo, exploring Cefalù and other bits in the area when we were just leaving from Termini on a train. There's not much I can say of great value other than the interior of Sicily was a good 1 hour 45 minutes of screensaver-like landscapes scrolling past the window. It was a real pleasure just to sit and watch. Strange that this might seem, there's something rather photographically pleasing about all the motorway flyovers, of which there are many. Change at Ditano, replacement bus to Catania. I'm going to have plenty more to say in the next episode where we spent much more time in Catania and got to explore it much better, but on my arrival, to give my first reaction, let me just say that Catania is not going out of its way to be your friend. It's not to say that it's horrible or unusually unpleasant. It's just not in the mood to stop and hear your life story, let's say. Stopped off in a bar for an espresso and a Messina, because why not? The flush is jerry-rigged with this cord, and not the last time I encountered an interesting bathroom setup in Sicily either. I don't have a great thesis statement on that, just make of it what you will. For an island that is often historical and a little quaint, Catania is almost unnervingly large. So, hostel number one, not a huge amount to tell you, just truth be told, kind of exhausted and a bit of an uneventful night actually. I left at 8 in the morning in the end. I had toyed with getting up at the 6 a.m. train, but slightly out of character, I decided to allow myself a little more rest and get the 8:45. Quick espresso, it was a little burnt. Catania is mildly more personable under blue skies, but it still has a lot of the same things Palermo does, like choking traffic jams and the buildings looking like they could use a bath. Even the graffiti is having a bad time. But we'll be back there in the next episode. I've actually got some nice things to say about it. Onto the train and heading to Syracuse. Not quite the blockbuster views of the previous day's train, but pleasant enough. By the way, I am evenly split between Syracuse and Syracuse. You're just not going to be able to make me care about something that minor. Got a slightly better look at Etna, though a long distance away. As we got close to Syracuse, there was this rather ominous boat graveyard and a sudden uptick in the amount of heavy industry. Well, train pulled in. It was too early to drop in on the hostel just yet, but instead I made a beeline straight for this archaeological park. This is the ancient quarter of Neapolis. We're going to need a little history segment to give some context here. So, while in modern times we could draw a very clear line in the sea between the Greek world and what is now the Italian world, in ancient times no such divide existed. While there had been some proto-Greeks trading and settling here since at least the Bronze Age, put a pin in it, in the Archaic period the city of Corinth founded a colony on the east coast of Sicily that would become Syracuse. And far from being a peripheral Greek colony, it became extremely powerful and dynamic. There was a whole massive saga with classical-era Athens trying to conquer it and losing. Perhaps the city's most famous resident was Archimedes. In popular culture, in the most recent Indiana Jones film, Syracuse is a central setting. Now, the main portion of ancient Syracuse would be on the little islet peninsula by the water, but this portion, which developed a little later, also has some significant ancient sites to see. It's a bit of a mix. A lot of it is in this ancient quarry, which, while rather attractive now, well, would have been an industrial area filled with slaves in ancient times. I can't lie, while I tried to get there at the earliest possible opportunity, by this point in the morning there were huge crowds that had been emptied out of coaches and were drifting around in massive groups, including some very vocal school children. I mean, this is pretty much the standard experience of a popular archaeological park if you aren't the very first through the gate at opening. So I was just photographing what I could, where I could, to frame out the crowds. The caves are of course very striking, though they did amplify the excited yells of the school groups to a near deafening roar. There's a tomb of Archimedes, which is undoubtedly no such thing, so I didn't wade through the crowds on a hot day to try and snap it. Heading out of that area to the theatre, and sucks to be you, they were in the process of installing a theatre set and cladding the chairs in some sort of protective structure. So, no ancient theatre of Syracuse for yous. It's not a great surprise. In general, I'm in favour of ancient theatres continuing to be performance spaces, though unless you're doing nothing but very traditional performances with minimal lighting, this does inevitably ruin the place as a visitor attraction. For example, the Amphitheatre of Verona. There are a lot of caves and hypogea around the edge of the rocky basin where the theatre lies, and even this waterfall. However, I was still working overtime to frame the crowds out. It was only when I got round here, it suddenly got quiet, and I had the amphitheatre almost entirely to myself. Yeah, no, don't get the impression that I didn't enjoy Neapolis, but it clearly gets thousands through each day, and both the heat and busyness around midday made it a little less enjoyable. I got a quick espresso on my way out. Heading on foot to the east past this modern church, which looks like it's about to take off into space at any moment, there were a couple of things I wanted to catch around here. There's a distinct treat in the form of this, the Basilica of San Giovanni, which once served as a cathedral, with traces back to the 500s AD. There's a lot of layers here, and of particular interest are the catacombs. But... oh, please. Why would you be so petty? I mean, really, I would have thought the Vatican would already be sick of conspiratorial Da Vinci Code-style books being written about it, that it would avoid making stuff like this, needlessly mysterious, but here we are. And other than not being able to film, there are also very limited opening times for tours, and it was not cheap. So all of that pushed together, I only got shots from the outside, which is a shame, but anyway. Not far away, I headed for the museum, low-angle flag shot. Now, this was total whiplash after the crowds of Neapolis, near complete silence. The museum is obscenely large. Full disclosure, I mainly just got around the prehistoric bit. I didn't really get onto all of the sort of Greek stuff from 500 BC onwards. There is just an incredible wealth of finds here. I have to say that I left having learnt a considerable amount. I had a whole new appreciation for just how much there was going on in Sicily into ancient times, and just how much there was left to see. I'm already thinking, man, I'm going to have to book a trip back here with the express purpose of just taking a day to go around the Syracuse Museum. I'm not even going to try and synthesize it into a proper summary. It more than needs its own... well, not just its own episode, its own series. Anyway, a very strong recommend. Go and see the Syracuse Museum. What followed was an uncommonly long walk, even by my standards, but hey, the weather was nice, it was hot, but not oppressively. Briefly caught this ancient necropolis from the 500s BC in the car park of a Lidl, of all places. Bit of a change from the normal Lidl experience. It was a lengthy stroll to get out of the north of Syracuse to the coastline. As you got out to the suburbs, this was, pretty nice, a bit of a breath of fresh air from the inner city. I was making good progress, but here's where I had to amend somewhat. See, all the way over there is Thapsos, a Bronze Age settlement, a major target I had on the list, and I'd convinced myself on paper that, I could manage a 2-hour walk along a beach, but the sun had started to get to me, and I don't know, looking at it, even though I technically did have the 4+ hours I needed, I bailed. Look, I'm up for it in theory, I just couldn't quite muster the drive to do this at the time. It's a pretty big commitment in terms of distance, and on top of everything I'd already done that day. So, not to leave empty-handed, headed down this coast path that must have once been a railway. Now, word of caution here, as you can see the cliff overhangs, and as you can see it's kind of fragile, so you should probably step very cautiously near the edge, but, well, that's not nothing. It looks pretty fragile, so no, I'm not walking on it. Not only do I not want to create a widow, but other people should get to enjoy this too. Took a moment to stop and enjoy that for a bit. Then what followed was a long and rather hot but very enjoyable walk down this coast path, stopping every so often to enjoy the coastline. Got a look at the island portion of Syracuse from afar. Would have to wait till tomorrow to see that properly. Most of the rest of this wander is not on camera since it produced less than especially stimulating footage. Quick espresso. Yeah, not bad actually. That's one way to create lampshades, I guess, and coming full circle to just a couple of hundred yards from where I stepped off the train, this was the hostel for tonight. It hadn't struck me at the time of booking just how facile this branding is, but credit where it's due. With what it is, the hostel does pretty great. It was inexpensive, it's got that hostel look, which is hard to pin down, but somehow familiar, and yeah, got talking with some interesting people, and since I'd not had a conversation in English for about 48 hours since I'd landed, it felt really good to talk to some strangers. While there was still some light, I jogged back towards the water. As I mentioned, there's several bits to Syracuse, and other than the ancient ruins of Neapolis on the western side of the urban area, just barely separated from the mainland, there's an island of, and I want to say, Ortigia? It's something like that. This was not the time to catch everything. I was on limited battery and limited sunlight. I just caught the sunset over the water, had a quick look at the ancient gate with the light just going. I caught a glimpse of the cathedral, which holds a bit of a secret, but we'll circle back to that a little bit later. Anyway, had a nice evening, continuing to converse with strangers at the hostel, which obviously yielded no footage. It's been one of the greatest unexpected benefits of travelling and staying in hostels. It gives you this opportunity to meet amazing people. Unsurprisingly, hostels do sort of select for outgoing. It stands to reason if you're prepared to crash in a room with complete strangers, it's not going to work if you're a die-hard introvert. And it's a connection I can't imagine fostering anywhere else in any other context in quite the same way. You get to trade perspectives and find out about other people's lives from around Europe and across the world. Look, I can't prove it to you unless you try it, but it's an incredible feeling just hitting it off with a group of complete strangers and talking into the early hours. The folks I talked to at the hostel certainly seemed a bit puzzled by my choice to leave the hostel at 5:45 in the morning, and this caper might seem a little odd out of context, but wait for it. So yes, very early train, just about 10 minutes down the line to a station that doesn't get many trains stopping, and in fairness, there's not much near it except, well, this honking great chemical plant, or I guess it's a refinery? That would explain the pipeline running into the sea. Anyway, either way, no, this was not primarily my target. That would be a bit of a hard pivot for what we normally film here. This is one that's not especially well known. Before I got here, so I'm walking past this chain link fence which marks the boundary of the plant, and I hear an aggressive barking from behind the fence, and yeah, okay, guard dogs. A lot of people in Sicily have those, but they're behind the fence and, oh, there's a hole in the fence. Ah! If they had decided to take a bite out of me, I would have been completely dead to rights. But luckily, these doggos just wanted to be friends, so just a change of pants for me then. Oh, and while I resist the urge to make a massive fuss of them, I don't overmind, but getting hands all over strays, that's how you get cooties, folks. But hey, look, they resolved to follow me down the road, and I wasn't going to argue with having a couple of party members for this quest. Past what could have been a kind of nice beach, except for the litter and, well, proximity to a large quantity of industrial chemicals. So this is Thapsos. It's a little islet. It's just connected to the mainland by a spit, like just a few yards across. I was really chancing it that I'd even be allowed to walk here. Its entrance is guarded by some barbed wire and crumbling warehouses, but there is a clear footpath too. So I'd got here and access wasn't forbidden, so that was already a huge relief. But while there were a few 20th century bits of cement scattered around, my target, which I hadn't been able to gather much information previous, was nowhere in sight. Now, I dithered getting a couple of wide shots, there's Etna in the distance again, but it was kind of looking like this early morning and the hour or so walk had been for nothing. Well, at least it was a nice morning and I'd made some friends, so I just headed down to the water because, might as well. And, wait, hang on. It was amongst the jagged rocks on the coast. There it was! So this is the necropolis of Thapsos, and after fretting about this for actual months, there it was. Okay, pause graphic. Here's that context I've been teasing. Okay, hands up who knows who the Mycenaeans were. Now, if you've caught the other videos on this channel, you probably should have caught it by now, but the Mycenaeans is the name we've given to the Bronze Age inhabitants of what is now Greece and the greater part of the Aegean. This has been an odyssey stretching back to 2018, where we first visited Mycenae itself. Ever since, whenever we can get over to Greece, we've been on the trail, whether it's the necropolis on Zakynthos, Tholos tombs in the Peloponnese, or whole settlements like Tiryns, traces on Crete, the Bronze Age shipwreck of Luberon in what is now Turkey, and all the way to Cyprus, where, granted, it's a blend of Mycenaean influence over the native cultures, but if we draw a map, just look at that spread, and this is all over 3,000 years ago. And the previous year, having chased the Mycenaeans all the way to their eastern extent on Cyprus, now, standing on Thapsos, you have, outside of museum pieces at least, the single greatest footprint of the Mycenaeans on Sicily. These rock-cut tombs, for the avoidance of doubt, there weren't any people living in these holes, at least not at first. It was adorable how each one, I'd point the camera at it and the doggos would be like, oh, you're right, that is an interesting thing to explore. Let me get in the frame a second. Whee! So I explained the Mycenaeans thing, okay, but why am I being so overexcited about here? It's not exactly Petra. Why are you so elated about this in specific? Well, look, in the main, I am, if anything, a musician by trade. That's what I grew up doing. The pivot to ancient history is a bit more specific to the last 6 or 7 years. And I don't have a university qualification or any credentials that I can hold up, just a modestly inexpensive camera and a rapidly expanding pile of hard drives with footage of ancient sites across the UK, Europe and the Mediterranean. Anyway, In the planning phase of this trip, I'd had to accept that getting to this pretty remote site that might not even be open to the public and or guarded by some cold-blooded killers, after all the doubts and the distinct possibility that no, you can't make this happen by yourself, you don't have a car, and you're just not important, so this isn't for you. I'd actually done it. I'd made my way to this extremity of the Mycenaean world, a goal that will be a little difficult to relate to, I fully accept, but just as a moment of self-actualization, this was a big deal for me, that this mad journey we're on, whether the collective is a big crowd or a small group or even just me, that we can do this, that I can do this. It just marked a high point. This whole trip did. So all that's left is the heartbreaking conclusion. See, after feeling like I could fly and having just the best morning, bear in mind, I think it was about 7:30 when I turned back. I swear, some of the best moments of my life have taken place before most people have got out of bed. But my companions for the entire trip, a near 3-hour round trip from the station to Thapsos and back again, I told these guys they were the goodest boys ever, and I tried to quietly slip away so I didn't break their little hearts. But they'd always catch up like, oh, there you are. So I get back to the station and they're still on my heels like, we're going to be best friends forever. And I'm just trying not to bawl my eyes out. In the end, all I can do is go into the train station waiting room and close the door. Like, I've got to make sure these guys don't just wander onto the track. So they're just hanging out like, no worries. I'm sure our new friend will be back in just a moment. And that's how I guaranteed myself a place in hell, ladies and gentlemen. My options for smuggling them onto a plane were going to be pretty limited. So let's just pour one out for the real ones. My party members can rest now. The quest is over. Okay, well, before this becomes too much of a bummer, after what had been an extremely special morning, everything else just felt like a victory lap. This, admittedly mid-espresso and above-average pastry, just hit like the best thing ever. Grabbed the rest of my stuff from the hostel, but wasn't time to go just yet. Headed back towards Ortigia. On the way, there's this stretch of what I can only assume is a Roman road, but there's no info I can find on it, really. It just appears they exposed this section in the middle of a park and left it to the cats, but great, okay. I made the slight mistake the previous evening of seeing this and ticking off like, oh, I guess that must be the Syracuse Temple of Apollo. But no. The temple is over here. And okay, well, that's considerably more impressive. I mean, no getting away from the site reuse. You've got a mosque, a Norman church, and a Byzantine tower that have risen and fallen again on the site, but all the while the incredibly sturdy Doric columns still standing. A bit of a wander further past things like this pretty fountain, and at long last I also saw inside the cathedral. Now, I can't lie, this is pretty wild. I've often given Baroque a pretty short shrift. I don't hate it or anything. It's impressive in its own way, but just my priorities are elsewhere, specifically around 400 plus years earlier. And the western facade of this, I mean, yeah, definitely digging it. Very pretty, but it's what's inside that's particularly special. And I'm not aware I've ever seen this done before. So you see these, I mean, Doric columns, okay, yeah, cool. Yeah, more Baroque architects fanboying over ancient Greece. That doesn't seem that unusual. No. They incorporated them into the church structure. Those are the columns of the Greek temple that had stood on the site. I mean, it's perhaps not surprising. I mean, if you had a structure like this, it wouldn't take much of a leap of imagination to say, well, you could make a pretty banging church out of that. So, had a drink in the square. The longer I stayed in Syracuse, the more I loved it. I was absolutely buzzing. But with that, I didn't have much longer. Train was at just before 1. Zipped through the streets, catching a few last details. I mean, this spring is supposed to be a big deal, apparently. Quick shot of the fort is all I had time for. Okay, here's a slightly better one. Okay, here's a slightly better one, but now we really do have to go. So, Syracuse had been really special, and for the only, 28 hours, it felt like at least a full week full of stuff. And more to the point, the rush of managing to do all of this solo and without a car. So, yeah, as you can tell, this meant so much to me, and we're going to cover more from the Sicily trip very soon when we get to Catania, and there's more stuff around there besides. In the meantime, if you've been enjoying the music in the background, it's ours. We make all the music for these episodes, and you can find it on bandcamp.com. If you want to support the channel, that's the place to do it. Please find us on all the socials, and we've got plenty more playlists with a lot more stuff going on from our different trips, so have a look through those. Otherwise, we'll catch you very soon.